Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining our panel from Tennessee State Universities. We're focusing today on infusing diversity, equity, and inclusion into open educational resources. My name is Dan Bureau. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'll be your moderator today. This session is being recorded as part of Open Education Week in Tennessee. And I want to thank Rachel and the Tennessee Higher Education Commission's Textbook Affordability for Student Success Task Force for putting on what is a wonderful collection of workshops this week. This session is recorded. It will be provided to all participants after the session today. It'll also be housed at the THEC website. You all have been muted upon entry, and so you'll stay that way throughout. We should ask that you also, if you're not presenting, to also turn off your video in order to kind of mitigate the issues with any sort of video transmission. Questions can be submitted throughout the webinar today. You can place those in the chat. We also have allocated about 10 minutes of time at the very end. So, and there's a number of staff from different institutions here in order to answer the questions that we have. As I mentioned, this is part of a larger slew of programs. There was one already yesterday. There's another one later today. We certainly encourage you to check these out. If you need more information on any of the webinars that are being hosted this week, just drop Rachel an email and they can get that to you. And also you can see here that there's a few that have already been recorded, and that's up there as well. That will be posted to the THEC website at a later date. In order to kind of give you some context about today's webinar, we're really looking at a grant initiative whose focus was to increase equity in accessing digital education initiatives and educational support materials. The institutions that were eligible were the 6 locally governed institutions across the state of Tennessee. The proposals needed to achieve one or more of the following kind of outcomes: addressing gaps in student academic outcomes, addressing success rates in courses, improving grades, increases in retention, persistence, and graduation. We wanted to also see proposals that significantly increased levels of access to resources that would be focused on equity and diversity initiatives. And ultimately, we wanted these to tie back to each institution's campus strategic plan, specifically their focus on diversity and inclusion. So this is an OER session, but the real emphasis for all these initiatives is to widen access and to create a more diverse and inclusive campus community. There will be a few outcomes for today's session. This is a highlight of 6 different proposals that have been approved and are currently being funded. All of these are currently just starting, so no one's made a lot of progress anywhere. So what we're really trying to focus on today is the intent of our grants, emphasizing the primary actions that we're going to take and the desired outcomes we're going to have once we are completed with these grants by the end of 2021. So by the end of today, you'll be able to kind of articulate some of the purposes, some of the action items, and some of the outcomes from each of our different proposals. I do want to applaud the group on the diversity of ideas. I think you're going to see a great breadth of different ways to approach OER, as well as to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion across the curriculum of an institution. So I'll turn this over to Dr. Robbie Melton, who will lead us off with Tennessee State.
Welcome, everyone, and life is good. On behalf of Tennessee State University, in addressing diversity, inclusion, in promoting, recruiting, retaining for graduating underserved students, we took OER to a different level. We believe in open play. I'm here to share with you our proposal on using esports as a tool to pathway into all disciplines, whether it's education, computer science, health, psychology, but to also to recruit, retain, and to graduate. Next slide, please. With that, the traditional methods that we have been using for years have not really worked in terms of significant number of underserved students to come to our colleges. In fact, when you look at your STEM programs, currently only 19% of students receiving a computer science degree, females, and only 2% are women of color. Also, more minorities switch to another major when enrolled in a STEM program, and minority STEM students are less likely to use their STEM degree upon graduation. So, ladies and gentlemen, challenges: recruiting, retaining, graduating. So we took a different view of open education, open resources, OER, in terms of open play. Next slide, please. So with that, we were able to document that over 83% of African American students play video games. Now, some of you out there might go, video games? Just hold on a minute. You're going to see how these video games, yes, the ones that we told our kids, put it down, I don't want to see you. You're going to see this tool right here as a mechanism to bring minorities into our colleges and across all of our programs. Next slide, please. So with that, we're taking the approach of esports as a winning tool for looking at diversity in terms of inclusion, and as I keep preaching to you, recruiting, retaining, and graduating. We wanted to tap in on this new esport explosion so that we can then pathway these students into the various careers. Next slide, please. So one thing that we know with this grant, we are able to design an esports course for dual enrollment, undergraduate and graduate. In fact, Tennessee State University offered the first graduate level esports course on the rise of gamification and esports. With this, our purpose to empower our administrators in understanding what this can do in bringing a new flair, a new energy for our students that can, again, empower them in terms of academics. Next slide, please. So yes, as you see with all of the gaming, life is good. I'm here to share with you all our project outcomes. Number one, to collect through open education resources, a collection that you all will be able to partake on the research regarding esports and education. Not only that, we're using Merlot, which is an open education portal where you just type in, next slide please, esports, and it's going to bring you all of the information, blogs, wikis, legislation, books, articles, all free, but collected and curated by Tennessee State University. So when you're ready to what? Play, you know where to go and get the information. Next slide, please. So this is just a little view that we have already prepared for the world, the curation of esports in terms of higher education, K-12, and per the disciplines. Next slide. Thank you. So as I conclude, I'm here to share with you this fall, we're going to offer the first esports in terms of the discipline so that you can also take this course because it's going to be open in terms of the content. We are sharing the content among all of the 6 universities. Our outcome again is to use esports as a tool to recruit, retain, and graduate, and to address the empowerment of education. Last slide, please. So again, everyone, I stop here to share with you on behalf of my team. I have Dr. Chisholm out there. You can't see her. We have Dr. Ampadu and Dr. Warren. We have the whole gang out there so that at the end, when you want to know more about playing, and again, innovative, creative approach of looking at open education through open play in empowering our students. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Robbie Melton, and you will always remember me as Life is Good. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Johnny Ann Butterfield, and I am representing the team from Austin Peay State University College of Behavioral and Health Sciences. And our project is the Health Outcome Equity Project, or HOPE. And we are creating an undergraduate interdisciplinary health and social justice certificate. It's 12 credits, and it spans the departments of psychological science and counseling, sociology, health and human performance, and nursing. And all the students enrolled in the certificate program will take an anchor course, which is the health and social justice course. And then the 9 remaining credits, students can choose from courses across those 4 departments. And I also just want to say our team is all on the call today as well. So I'm sure that they'll be happy to answer questions at the end too. So for us, this grant was very timely because we were having conversations due to all of the things of the last year. COVID, the social unrest surrounding racial tension, all brought to the fore long-standing structural inequalities that disproportionately affect our students of color, our LGBTQ students, our low-income students. And so we were already having conversations about how we could deal with the COVID health issues that were impacting our minority students, and conversations about be more intentional in our pedagogy to deal with increased access and centering the minority experience. And so when this grant opportunity arose, for us, it was an opportunity to synthesize these 2 things, which are really part and parcel. They really are organically related. So we wanted to create an immersive experience, merging these 2 things. And so we decided that we would propose this certificate program, and I've outlined the 3 overarching goals here. I'm going to start with number 3, since one of the major foci of the grant was to bridge the digital divide. Of course, that's something that we're trying to do through curating OER resources, especially in our anchor course, the Health and Social Justice course. But we also budget for laptops. When we begin the program this fall, we're going to cap it at 20 students, and we're going to provide laptops to those students for the duration of the certificate program. But for us, the access to technology is only one piece of the puzzle. Just as important is how the technology is used, the context of the technology. So we situate the access to technology as one tool in a broader strategy to center the minority experience in higher ed. Higher ed has notoriously had difficulty fully integrating underserved student populations into the classroom. And so we really wanted to focus, in addition to the technology piece, on how we could create an immersive experience for students. And literature out there shows that student empowerment is one avenue through which that can occur. So we really center student empowerment techniques in our pedagogical approach. I'm going to hop back up to my number 1 goal here. We really want to try to lessen symbolic annihilation for the students in our courses. We want to incorporate in our OER resources the authors of diverse backgrounds, diverse imagery in our courses. And so we're hoping that seeing the lived experiences reflected back to our minority students will empower them, be one avenue for empowerment. We also want to empower our students through community building. And in order to do this, we've thought long and hard about how we can make this happen, how we can create authentic safe spaces or counter spaces. Or I was in a webinar the other day that used the term brave spaces, which I really like. We want to use psychology doctoral students to facilitate group discussions, almost aligned with the social justice counseling perspective. And we want our students to have an authentic space to deal with and process the things that are happening socially. It's impacting them, and we feel like they need a safe space in which to really do that. So all of that said, we are mindful of the mechanisms through which we're trying to improve these academic outcomes. Access to technology is one, this intentional pedagogy is another, and we don't believe that either can stand on their own. Next slide, please, Dan. So we have a number of outcomes that we're looking at. Obviously, academic success is the overarching outcome. And as I just mentioned, we want to understand how increased access to technology is affecting our students' academic success, but also how it affects their sense of empowerment, their sense of community and solidarity. We want to understand all of these things on their own, but we also want to understand how they relate to one another and how they relate to academic success. So what are we actually measuring? Well, we're going to look at perceived stress, self-care and coping, connection and belonging, and of course, academic success running through all of these. Once again, we want to understand stress and stress on its own, coping on its own, etc. But we want to understand their relationship to one another and to academic success. We have several quantitative measures to gauge these things. We're using, I'm going to just kind of rattle through them: perceived stress scale, the PERMA profiler, a self-care survey. We also have some qualitative measures. We're going to do some focus group interviews. We're going to solicit some written feedback throughout the course. And we also have some formative assessments that we're going to be doing throughout. So ultimately, we hope that through this project at the macro level, that our students get exposed to the structural and systemic correlates of health and disease. At the micro level, that they can take power over their own health and their own bodies. And at the meso level, that they can be change agents in their communities. And we're hoping that through the increased technology and pedagogical approach, that we empower the students to not only succeed academically in our certificate program, but on their entire academic journeys. And so we're excited and we're moving forward. And I think that I'm going to pass the baton to ETSU. And yes, references if needed.
Thank you. So our proposal, we are improving diversity, equity, and inclusion at the ETSU. The next slide. So this is our team. As you can see, we have a large team. The goal for this Oer project is to get the institutional support that our school is interested, and that provide the support to the faculty to make this happen, make it visible, that is a doable project, that faculty can try and then help, especially underrepresented students at ETSU. We have our provost, VP Equity and Inclusion, and the library professional, the coordinators for equity and inclusion. So we have a large team, and so next slide. So at ETSU, we already have a OER program. We started this program 3 years ago. And that the last 3 years, we funded about $60,000 to 20 plus faculty to create or adopt OER materials in their classes. based on the data that we collected, over 1,600 students benefited from those OER programs and saved student over $250,000, and it is going to continue to benefit the students. So when I mean this proposal was out, we are thinking that how we can use this grant to bring our OER program to the next level. So at ETSU, we have about 18% unrepresented students. We have high number of these underrepresented students come from a low-income family. 80% of our students eligible for Pell Grant. So and the financial burden is significant. So our goal is that whether if we could reduce the financial burden from them in terms of textbook and access to the course material, there'd be a huge benefit support from them. I mean, my colleagues, they've seen then how the providing a textbook scholarship benefited them in terms of their retention and the GPA. So here, our target is all the minority students at ETSU. Is not any specific group of students or program. We are going to look all the students to be eligible or benefit by the program that we are going to implement. The three main objectives for our proposal: reduction of the financial burden. Our goal here to save underrepresented students more than $300,000. Those OER program also will help the majority student as well. So ultimately, the benefit would be much higher cumulatively. But most important, as my colleagues mentioned before, access and equity. When a class use OER materials, that means we level the academic field on the day one. It doesn't matter whether students can buy class materials or not. I mean, because of the OER, those materials are available on the first day of the class, anytime, anywhere. So student now doesn't have the differentiated access of the material. Many times, I mean, the last 3 years, when we implemented the OER program, we collected some data, and then most of the students would say that if they can go a semester without buying a textbook, they'll try to do that. But because of the OER material, they have access to those at the day one. So definitely that helps them in terms of getting the course material and then have better performance in their class. And pedagogical transformation. So when we use any specific publisher textbook, we as a faculty, you know, that we are some way confined within that framework of the textbook. Now, when we go to the OER, we get out of that box. So everything is possible. This provides faculty an opportunity to design a course that focus on equity and inclusion, that focus on social justice, and everything that many traditional textbook doesn't give much of a focus. So hopefully, our program will help faculty in the pedagogical transformation, and the courses that we are going to develop through this OER program will have much better, hopefully much better student satisfaction. Next slide, please. So as I said, that since we already have an OER program, and we are saying that how we can get this OER program benefited by the underrepresented students. So our focus would be Janet courses, and out of I mean all the Janet courses that students need to take, we targeted 10 Janet classes, and these are the top 3: math, communication, and chemistry. So math 1530, communication 2045, and chemistry 1110. So those would be our target courses for the OER implementation. At ETSU, we offer 110 section of those classes each year. And what we have found that 20 out of 110, 20 section faculty already adopted some OER materials, either the whole textbook or significant OER material. So we see a synergy there. If we can motivate more faculty to adopt OER material, that will have significant benefit whole ETSU campus, especially for our representative students, but for the whole campus, especially to the Janet courses. So our project activities, these are the 4 major activities that you're gonna do our OER workshop. We already scheduled the workshop in 2 weeks. We will have our first workshop. Already 40 faculty sign up for the workshop. We are gonna do two of those workshops. We are gonna introduce our OER program that we already have, plus the new TBR funded OER program. And then we have a summer camp, a month-long summer camp. And in that summer camp, our goal is to, at the end of the summer camp, the faculty will have a full OER program course ready. And so the syllabus, the D2L side that we use our educational delivery. So with minimal the effort, they will be ready to implement the OER course in the fall semester. Then implementation of the course in the fall semester will have a faculty learning community. They're going to meet monthly to exchange ideas, and the end of the semester will have assessment. Next slide, please. So student success, as all of our goal is student success retention. We are using Janet class, so the students in their freshman, sophomore year. So retention be important, GPA, OER adoption rate. So we have some data that how faculty are interested about the. So hopefully with this the grant, it will help us to improve the OER adoption for the faculty, and definitely the satisfaction. A lot of the cases faculty are not interested about because they think there is not good materials out there, or materials are inferior. So hopefully with this grant, we'll create some great quality OER classes that will increase student and faculty satisfaction. Now, one of the important things that I'm going to talk about the sustainability, because we already, since we have an existing OER program, what we have seen that this is really, some of the faculty will be really interested. They're going to jump into it. They're going to try to implement, and then after a year, they somehow abandon that ship and go back to the traditional textbook. And so we lose some of these, our initial investment that we have done. So this time our goal will be how to sustain the OER courses. What are the issues and how to deal with those issues for the faculty, so those courses can be sustained and then can be better. Showcase another things that OER classes are kind of invisible. So we want to showcase OER and make those courses as a model for other faculty. And so that it gets the visibility, those courses, that how it's effective, help students learn better. Hopefully that will motivate more and more faculty to adopt OER material or create OER material and benefit students as a whole at ETSU. So that's all I have for my presentation. Dan, who'd be up next? So, okay, all right. Well,
thanks, Dan. In the interest of accessibility, I'm going to put a link in the chat to the script that I'm presenting from. I don't have a lot of text on my slide, so there's additional information found on that link that I just popped into the chat. I'm Erica Stone, and I'm presenting on behalf of the Middle Tennessee State University team, and many of my team members are here in the room, and I'm sure they're happy to answer questions in the chat if they arise as I'm presenting. MTSU's OER grant-funded initiative, Embracing Equity Through OER, builds on the institutional knowledge, experience, and partnerships to make MTSU a more equitable and inclusive campus. We understand that accessibility, diversity, inclusion, and equity are intertwined, and we're focusing specifically on how to support academic equity at MTSU through this grant. So we understand that academic equity, that is where all students have an equal opportunity to succeed regardless of their background, characteristics, or individual circumstances, requires institutions to identify and take responsibility for eliminating barriers to students' education and student success. So particularly for students from underrepresented populations and first-time college students, military students, and the like. At MTSU, we believe that OER is an important tool for increasing access to quality educational resources on the first day of class, and increasing diverse perspectives, as well as creating equitable and inclusive learning opportunities and experiences. In the link that I shared in the chat with you, there's a link to our in progress website, as well as a recent press release that gives some additional details about some of the pieces of the grant. Through faculty mini grants, next slide, please. Through faculty mini grants, embracing equity through OER encourages instructional innovation and enhances the scholarship of teaching and learning by providing instructors with resources to redesign their courses around the use of open educational resources, both in textbooks and ancillary materials. The steering committee for this grant is interdisciplinary and also has the support of our Vice Provost of Faculty Affairs, who's serving as a project director, and we have an assistant professor from University Studies, an acquisitions librarian, an instructional designer, a dean of the College of Basic and Applied Sciences, and myself as a general education representative. Our main goals and outcomes for this grant are threefold. So these are listed in my notes that I gave you a link to. Faculty awareness, faculty adoption, and above all, student success. And the faculty awareness of OER and the faculty adoption or adaption or creation of OER are precursors for the student success that we hope to see through this grant-funded initiative. Our faculty awareness, we're hoping to increase a deeper understanding of how OER can support student success and increase the success of underrepresented students. We're hoping to increase a broader awareness of OER across the institution, particularly in high impact courses and gateway courses like general education. And a recognition across the university that OER is an engaging way to support student success. So increased faculty adoption, adaptation, and creation of OER in their classes across the board will provide a more equitable education environment and hopefully support student success. Where our overarching goals for student success through this grant are for students to spend less money on textbooks across the board and less money on required course ancillary materials through the use of OER, have first day access to course materials, experience increased course completion persistence and course grades, and a decrease in DFW rates across the institution. Next slide, please. So our grants, our faculty grants are coming in 3 levels, and our faculty are in the process of learning about how to apply for these grants, and those applications will get submitted in April. So we have a small scale alteration to a course, a medium scale conversion, and a large scale transformation. There are additional details about these different levels of grant possibilities in the notes that I dropped into the chat. But the idea is that a small scale alteration involves a slight change to a textbook or learning material in a particular course, in a single course. A medium scale conversion is a variety of projects, sometimes across multiple instructors or across multiple courses, that will impact a larger number of assignments or a larger number of students. And then a large scale transformation is an adaptation, or creation of OER in a gateway course. So these are the general education courses that are impacting thousands of students per semester, and include print resources, podcasts, voice-over slide presentations, the whole gamut of OER materials. Next slide, please. So our grant is like all of your grants, taking place over the next year. Faculty will submit their grants by April. Right now, we're facilitating a series of 6 faculty workshops through our Teaching and Learning Center, and we've done 2 of those. We're doing a 3rd one next week, educating faculty and increasing faculty awareness and understanding of the kinds of OER resources that are available through the state of Tennessee and through MTSU's library. We'll accept grant applications in April. We also have a faculty advisory council that's helping us determine who will receive the grants, and those will be awarded in May. The faculty will work on their grant funded projects over the summer. And then in fall 21, awarded grants will be, or awarded grant teams will be invited to participate in faculty learning communities, educating the campus on what they've done in their courses and fully implementing some of the OER centered instruction that they proposed in their grant funded projects. If you have questions about our grant, please let me know in the chat. And also Dr. Torsney and Dr. Ryan Corstange are here. And I believe Susan Mangrum, our acquisitions librarian, is also here. So we're happy to answer questions should you have any.
Well, very good. I welcome this opportunity. My name is Mike Gocher. And when we looked at this, we looked at it from addressing the digital divide issues that the students in the state of Tennessee face. COVID changed how we were doing education. And if you will, taking from MTSU's notion of it changed access, the ability to get to the table. So what we wanted to look at was what happened and how did students address the changes that took place in March when we had to shift to video conferencing and we had to shift to online. Were our students able to get to the material for them to be able to successfully navigate video conferencing, able to get to the materials necessary for them to take their online classes? And so we looked at that digital divide issue. The state of Tennessee ranks 29th for broadband access. 34% of our rural students lack minimum broadband access. But I think what is most telling here is when we look at our the wealthiest county in Tennessee is Williamson County. And in Williamson County, over 15,000 residents do not have adequate broadband access. So if we think about that, then let's think about those students that are in our rural counties where the fiber is not reaching or where they don't have the access necessary to get the materials. One study showed that in Middle Tennessee alone, over 90,000 residents cannot participate in a video conference or download more than a few photos. So if you think about that, think about the materials that we were pushing out to our students last spring, and we continued to push them in the summer and the fall, and now we're pushing out to them now. Are they able to get those materials so that they can successfully complete their courses? Next slide, please. Okay. And what we realize is this lack of access causes significant problems for our students. It widens that educational inequity that is already there. And in the previous presentations, you heard about how that educational inequity is there, how it impacts minorities, how it impacts women. And by not having that access, the ability to get to that material, it widens that inequality. It also increases the likelihood of students stopping out or the students just completely withdrawing, and the notion also that they fail. That lack of success creates significant problems for them. And therefore they become very disenchanted with higher education. They don't see what the advantage is of them struggling through this. So it creates that notion of them, we hurt our retention efforts if we can't do something to help them be successful. It also wrecks, if you will, our drive to 55 that the state of Tennessee has. That has been an important initiative for several governors, and it continues with this governor. And so if our students are dropping out, they're not succeeding, therefore we won't get to this drive to 55. It also jeopardizes our workforce and economic development across the state of Tennessee. If we're going to continue to encourage students to stay at home after we've made an investment in their education, we want to keep them in Tennessee, well, then we need to have the jobs necessary for them to do that. And when we cannot have adequate access and that digital divide continues to increase, then it jeopardizes that workforce and economic development initiatives that the state has and that each of our universities are invested in. And I guess finally, what I want to say here is that COVID makes it harder. It makes it harder for everyone, but it especially makes it harder for low-income students. When we were looking at some of the problems that our students are facing, we looked at one particular county, and they do indeed have broadband access, but that broadband access was through fiber to their homes, and the average cost per month was $150 for internet. Well, that certainly hits some of our students very significantly, and we wanted to look at those challenges there. So you see, we kind of looked at that digital divide and the problems associated with the digital divide. Next slide, please. So what we decided to do is we wanted to address that digital issue. And we wanted to look at students that were in at-risk or distressed counties served by Tennessee Tech. Those at-risk and distressed counties were identified by the governor's office. So they do research across the state. And when we think about that, we're looking at average income within those counties from between $26,000 and $32,000. That's kind of where the at-risk and distressed is. We identified a few counties here: Scott, Jackson, White, Clay, Fentress, Morgan, Hancock, Van Buren, Bledsoe, and others. So we looked at those. And then what we saw was that Tennessee Tech has over 1,000 students that are in these counties. And 42% of TTU students are Pell eligible. So we're looking at an at-risk county, and we're looking at at-risk students, and we're trying to see what can we do to help them have access to materials. I think part of this was driven home for me. I work with the Tennessee High School Speech and Drama League. I help them do their competitions across the state. And I've been serving as their executive director since '95. And what we do is we hold competitions across the state of Tennessee. But because of COVID, we couldn't hold our competitions live, so we were doing them virtually. And what I was finding was we were finding students that were doing their presentations on their phone inside their car, or they were doing their presentations on their phone or on their laptop while standing outside McDonald's, or they were doing them in various other locations that had free Wi-Fi. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, why am I making the assumption that students in college are better prepared than those students that are in high school? And I wanted to see what we could do, and what Tennessee Tech wanted to do was see if we could put forth a proposal so that we can address those significant challenges that our students are facing. And so what are we going to do? Well, first, what we've done is the grant provides us funding for 200 mobile hotspots with unlimited data and no throttle back once data is used past a particular point. So one, we want to give them unlimited data. The second thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to incorporate what is called mobile device management. And what that does is that allows us to stop students from going to particular websites. Okay, what we're wanting to avoid them doing is take these mobile hotspots and then stream Netflix or stream HBO Max. We want them using them for educational purposes. Okay, so what we've done is we're going to have match groups in here, and we're going to limit data, not limit data, but limit the sites it can go to on some of the devices, and not limit the sites on the other, so that we can see how much data is actually necessary for them to be successful in the college classroom, is what we're trying to do there. We are wanting to get a good feel for what does this actually cost? How much data do students need in order to be successful in the classroom? And that's kind of where we're going. Next slide, please. Okay. So we want to determine how to get adequate coverage to the rural students. That is a real challenge. And you've probably faced that with your cell phone, that you find you have coverage in some areas, but you don't have coverage in others. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to put together a collaboration that pulls in AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile and have them all work together so we can reach these students that are in rural areas that don't have the adequate access. And so we're trying to pull that collaboration together, and that has become quite a challenge, more than I thought it would be, but we're working on that. We also wanted to determine exactly how much data is needed. Is 5 gigs enough? Is 10 gigs enough? How much is needed? Because there is a cost associated with that. And what we want to do is determine how much that data is, and then we'll look at that usage, that timing, so that maybe we can come up with a proposal that we can implement across the entire state, or definitely we want to look at it in relation, how can we address the student needs here at Tennessee Tech? And this project doesn't target a particular student body. It does target those students that are in at-risk and distressed counties, regardless of what major they are in. We're also looking at student stress. We all know that students will do whatever it takes in order to be successful. I mean, they will find those locations where they can get free Wi-Fi, but clearly that creates a stress level for them. And so what we're wanting to do is look at that stress level. And then finally, we're going to assess student satisfaction. How happy were they with the coverage that they were getting? How happy were they with these mobile hotspots? How can we improve that so that we can provide that safety net necessary for them, and we can enhance student success and therefore enhance the goals that our state is facing? That's our proposal. Thank you. Now Memphis.
Thank you. I am so happy to be with you this afternoon. I'm going to start my timer to talk about our programs at Memphis. So the University of Memphis has an asset that is humongous, and that is our beautiful, diverse student body. We have 55% of our students are students of color, 44% of Pell eligible, and 33% of first generation. We consider this an imperative to the campus. We've worked very hard to recruit, retain, and improve our graduation rate of these students. And so the imperative to us now is to figure out how to support them in every way that we can. And open resources is one way for us to do that. I am here today on behalf of my co-PIs, Dr. Ladrika Minson-Fur, Dr. John Evans, and Dr. Ebenezer Osegan. So we are happy to talk with you briefly about our 4 projects. They are 4 distinct projects, but they are integrated, held together, and unified around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to go through each of them very, very briefly, and then talk about the outcomes that we expect from these projects. I'm ready. So the first project, we were in the midst of a campus-wide initiative from the directive of our president around eradicating systemic racism and promoting social justice on our campus. Many universities around the country had sent out statements around the civil and racial unrest in our nation. Instead of a statement, we wanted to focus on how do we take this and infuse it into courses, teaching, teacher development, and improving outcomes for our students and for our faculty. So the first initiative is the Eradicating Systemic Racism and Promoting Justice. This was cross-campus, faculty, staff, and student engagement to help us understand how do we identify frameworks that are appropriate for a university campus as richly diverse as ours, because that often is based on, the diversity and the kinds of needs that are needed at the time. How do we insert this into curriculum revision, curriculum improvement? How do we modify and improve the culture and climate that is designed for such a diverse student body and diverse faculty? And then how do we identify models, and yet create our own models as a result of our work? So that was the curriculum piece. The second piece is the faculty development. How do we also simultaneously improve curriculum and support faculty in their growth and development around these issues and around the use of open resources as classrooms tools, so that we could also at the same time decrease costs for students, improve access for students, and at the same time improve faculty ability and knowledge base to integrate these tools into their classroom. Then the third part is two different sets of courses. We have some English courses, two of them that virtually every student on campus takes, and we have math courses. And so in those two courses, there's a pilots that will be initiated to help understand how to use these resources in those classrooms, and then how to study the implementation of those courses, the materials in those courses, and then how to understand how we kind of translate that across the campus. The English courses are literary heritage, and the African-American literature course. Virtually every student takes one or both of those courses. And the math course is probability and statistics, and understanding how do we flatten inequities that might occur in courses like this, since they are required of all students, so that we are paying greater attention to curriculum and pedagogy in terms of delivery for students. So these courses then will be used to help us understand how we reduce costs, how we have students with textbooks material and course materials beyond what's traditionally used, as many of you have talked about it. And the other piece that thread throughout these is, how do we assure we are inserting diverse voices, perspectives, histories, and realities into the coursework? And most textbooks are not good at doing that. So we know if we want to do that, so our students see themselves reflected in our curriculum, then we have to put the work into doing it to make sure that that happens. And so that we want to put more work into that, so our students won't say that they come to a diverse campus, yet they never have an opportunity to understand diverse perspectives and experiences, and they are marginalized from the curriculum. So that's the work that we're putting into doing those areas. In terms of outcomes, I'm going to go through these very, very quickly because we do want to hear your questions. In terms of, we have outcomes designed around faculty and outcomes for students. In terms of faculty-focused outcomes, it really is around the curriculum redesign so that it's culturally responsive, inclusive, is socially just, and is driven toward equity. Those are critical to our campus, and we are very serious about translating those into practices that we can then measure and determine the impact of those things, beyond the fact that they are great ideals that are necessary for our country and for our campus. So making the curriculum improvement, integrating the OER materials into that work, and then making sure that we have practices and procedures to study what we're doing, so that we again can move toward innovative pedagogical methods that we can study, examine, review, and improve upon. Thank you, Dan. The student-focused outcomes are next. Yes, thank you so much. And those really are focused on making sure that we do equity studies and equity audits, which require, of course, that we disaggregate data by race and gender, so that we make sure, and income, so that we make sure that we are moving toward equitable outcomes for all students, and recognizing the improvements in the course completion rates, reduction in costs for students, and increasing exposure to literature, perspectives like I talked about, and as many of you have talked about, diminishing that digital divide. So that are the outcomes we have focused on students. Dan, I hope I left a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
What questions do folks have?
Dan, I see that Meredith is on with us from our library, and she's helping to collect and get access to some math materials. And she's asking if anyone has any ideas on that to please share that with us. Thank you, Meredith.
I think we've been going through and monitoring the chat, and I think that we've answered most questions that came up in there, but if we did not, please either post that into the chat or unmute your mic and ask that question for the presenters. Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, these certainly are a collection of very diverse takes on one specific grant process. And so I would also want to invite any of the presenters to offer any final thoughts about common threads, obviously beyond the OER and DEI focus, but very different initiatives. A lot of it takes into account the different contexts and institutional priorities, those kinds of things. But are there any wrapping up thoughts from our presenters?
Hey Dan, this is Moin, ETSU. I have a question for Joni and Butterfield, one of our. Joni, and you mentioned that in your outcome, you collect data about the perceived stress, self-care and coping, connection and belonging. How do you collect the data? I mean, are you gonna use some instrument that you're gonna develop, or there is some existing instrument? If you can, I'm really interested because I don't know that how you can measure. I am not in health science. I'm an engineer.
Yeah, sure. So we are using existing instruments. They're standardized measures. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm a sociologist. So I myself have not used some of those measures before. I have my psychology colleagues on the call. They can perhaps add even more detail to what those instruments entail. But because we are interdisciplinary, we were able to have, I think it's a strength of our project that we were able to take different measures and methodologies from across our discipline to use in our assessment. And we've already gone through the IRB process. And so we're really hoping to turn this eventually into a longitudinal project and be able to assess this, for some time to come. But yes, they are standardized. And if anyone else from our team wants to jump in, please do.
This is Nicole Nickmeyer. I am on that team. I will just say that they're all self-report measures, and we were looking to do pre and post testing of the students who participate in that anchor course that Johnny Ann talked about. And they're all measures that are validated, well regarded, and been used a lot. And we're using the PERMA, which is a measure of flourishing that comes out of the positive psychology perspective. And we're using that in another study that we are currently doing at Austin P that's with another grant looking at vet success. So
thank you. Really, if I reach you guys, can you able to share those instruments with me?
Certainly, happy to do that.
Okay, thank you so much.
I think it's exciting that we're already seeing some connections here in terms of things we want to better study and better know. And one of the objectives of this session was that we wanted to not only talk about what we are doing, but kind of hear more from others so that we might be able to partner more on different initiatives to address OER implementation. It's also very exciting to see Meredith connect with some of the colleagues across the state to talk more about faculty training in the OER area. So one of the outcomes from this was to learn about the different programs. One of the kind of nice byproducts is that now you all have connections and people that you can turn to in order to implement these initiatives on your campus as well. Any final thoughts or questions in our last minute? Well, wonderful. I want to thank Rachel again for coordinating these webinars all week long, as well as our team of panelists here. And certainly all of them are accessible at some point. If you do have questions, we can certainly pass along emails and such. We can put those into the chat real quick as we wrap up here. So, and yeah, everyone is invited to the 2:30 Eastern session. And I know, Robbie, you have a session tomorrow as well, talking about Merlot among other sessions. So we encourage you to look at those lists and attend more of them as you're able to throughout the day. All right. Take care of yourself and have a great rest of your day and great rest of your week.